Greetings! We're in West Africa this week for a folk epic still largely consumed in its oral form, Sunjata, an epic with its origins in medieval Islamic West Africa. Sunjata Keita was a 13th century king of Mali who lived from around 1217 to 1255 CE and founded the Mali Empire. Two Muslim travelers to Mali, Muhammad ibn Battuta of Morocco and Ibn Khaldun of Tunisia, both heard tell of his deeds when they traveled separately to Mali in the century after Sunjata's death. The famous king Mansa Musa, who made a fabulous Hajj or pilgrimage to Mecca in the 14th century, was reported to be Sunjata's great-nephew. One note, you will see a variety of spellings for the characters from this epic. Sunjata's name is sometimes spelled Sundiata, but regardless of spelling, the name means the Lion of Sogolon, his mother. I'd also like to note that the epic in our anthology refers to Sunjata by some additional names like Simbon and Soolon Ma'an too, just to make things confusing. According to Jan Jansen, quote, "Today, Sunjata is remembered in large parts of West Africa as the founder of Mande or Manding. We hear the term Mande quite a bit in the version of Sunjata in your anthology. Mande is in present day is a small geographic area, but in the West African imagination, it has, according to Jansen, a much broader meaning and is similar to society or the civilized world in general. So Sunjata the person, with all his historical and mythical layers, is responsible for representing the larger culture of this region of the world, even today. For instance, the Sunjata epic, orally recited, is part of the Kamba Bolon, or coming-of-age ceremony, still held in Kangala, Mali. Even though Sunjata, the historical figure, lived in the 1200s CE, modern-day storytellers, called griots or jali, weave in the past with the present, quote, taking you on a narrative journey derived from the distant historical and legendary past, while providing frequent glimpses into the contemporary world of the performer and his audience, close quote, Newton. In footnote 5 on page 1465 of the Norton Anthology, we see another example of the interconnectedness of the past and the present. Tassi Kondi, the epic's narrator, describes the death of Sumaworu, Sunjata's enemy, something he would never do in a public performance for fear of embarrassing or upsetting one of Sumaworu's descendants who might be in the audience. Please understand that Sumaworu lived in the 1200s, so the memories are long. You see a continued interest today in Mali regarding the epic of Sunjata as a piece of cultural memory. Although rituals in Mali culture today have moved from the occult practices of the past to Islamic holiday and ritual observances, quote, when a song or even a bit of narrative is performed at a civic cultural event, it is like a public exhibition of one of the most treasured relics from the National Heritage Collection, close quote, Newton. Sunjata and Islam coexist side by side in Mali, a reality we can see in the narrative itself, or at least the iteration of it recorded in your Norton Anthology, where, for example, both occult practitioners and Islamic diviners work side by side with their magic. Politically, Sunjata remains an important way for modern-day governments to connect with the past and establish themselves as authentic power sources. Mali, present day, has been the scene for political unrest. There was a coup as recently as June of 2020, and as of August 2020, the country is one of only 2 countries suspended from the African Union. Because, quote, for the state, Sunjata is a source of legitimation, evoking the origins of authority from a historical period that has taken on mythic proportions, close quote, Newton. Though forms of government may change, Sunjata remains an intrinsic part of this long-standing culture. As you read Sunjata, here's some things to notice. One concept that comes up frequently in Sunjata is dalalu, or nyama, a word that means occult power or supernatural powers. Sunjata and his main rival Sumaworu have lots of nyama. We can see this power surrounding Sunjata from even before his birth, from the nyama or dalalu of his stepmothers, who cursed his own mother to spend 7 years being pregnant. If you're paying attention to such things, you'll begin to notice some patterns of repetition in terms of numbers, especially the numbers 7 and 9. The number 7 seems particularly associated with Sunjata himself, as he spends 7 years inside his mother's womb, 7 years without being able to walk, etc. 7 in many cultures is seen as indicating perfection or completion. I'm unsure as to the significance of the number 9 in terms of what it may mean in Sunjata, but you'll notice that Sunjata's father has a penchant for going overboard, and instead of choosing one recommended thing, usually a wife of a particular description, he will choose 9 of that thing instead. Perhaps we can read 9 as a number of excess, or fulfillment, or merely as the highest digit before you start combining digits together to get high numbers, and thus a stand-in for a whole lot of something. In Sunjata, we find a specific type of character, the Jeli. The plural is Jeliu. The Jeli is a kind of storyteller or bard. The French, who later colonized Mali, called them griots, and you'll still see Jeliu referred to as griots in some sources. The Jeliu are there to advise Sunjata, to praise him, and to preserve the history of the Mande people. They still play an important role in West Africa today, with the profession being a kind of family inheritance. In fact, some of the popular West African singers of today come from families of Jeliu. Two other features I'd like to discuss are syncretism and anachronism. Syncretism is a blending of religious or cultural values or stories. We saw this in Dante's Inferno. The author blended Judeo-Christian faith with Greco-Roman mythology in his conception of hell. In Sunjata, we see the Malian characters still very much involved in their West African folk religion, but also practicing Islam. Although there may have been and still may be tensions between these two ways of life, in Sunjata the characters pay deep attention to Niyama while outwardly adhering to the tenets of Islam. Note the occurrences of the Arabic Bismillah, an oath that Muslims take at the beginning of a venture, in both the mouths of heroes and villains. According to Merriam-Webster, an anachronism is a word that means an error in chronology, especially a chronological misplacing of persons, events, objects, or customs in regard to each other. The historical Sunjata lived in the 13th century, well before gunpowder or muskets as we know them today made their way to West Africa, and yet we find them in Sunjata the epic. This is an example of the way the epic, while it is still in its oral form primarily, grows and changes with its teller and audience. The version in your book, translated by David C. Conrad, was recorded in 1994, and the storyteller was Tassi Kondi, a Jeli who lived in Guinea. Now let's turn to Sunjata as an epic. This work still exists as an oral performance, so we can see here a work in progress and get a peek into how works like Gilgamesh, the Iliad, or the Ramayana may have looked as they were in the process of being written down. I'll bullet point the following features of epics as a reminder from the Gilgamesh Week 2 lecture, and briefly discuss how they may or may not apply to Sunjata. So, do we have a hero of high social class? Check. Do we have a hero with extraordinary skills? Check. Do we have a hero whose exploits have national significance? Check, check, check. Do we have an invocation of a muse? Not so much. Did we begin in media res? Not so much either. In fact, we get the creation story, if you will, of Sunjata. We know his entire backstory, including how long he spent in the womb. Is our story set in the epic past? Check, with some modern anachronisms. Does the story have its roots as an oral performance? Check. Do we have epic similes? I didn't see any, but to be fair, I did not start looking for them until the last few pages. Sunjata definitely shares some other literary features with older epics like the Gilgamesh. I'm thinking of repetition here. Does this work have an arming of the hero scene? Yes. Think about how Sunjata receives 3 special gifts from his mother so that he can win the battle with Sumawaru and take over his rightful place as king. Did our hero go on a journey? Check. Like Rama, Sunjata must go into exile and then return to take his rightful place as ruler. And finally, do we have a battle in which the hero must perform extraordinary feats? I mean, Sunjata has a sorcery horse, for goodness sake. So, check. A final note. Some say that Disney's The Lion King is based on Sunjata. Others say it's based on Hamlet. In a few weeks' time, when we read Hamlet, I'll be interested to hear what you think about the question of origins. Have a great week, and I hope you enjoy the Epic of Sunjata.